So if you were given the gift of immortality today, like right now, how long do you think it would take before you just stopped caring about ordinary human problems?
Oh, wow. Um, that is a massive question to start with.
Right. I mean, really think about it for a second. If you knew, like beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you were going to live for 1,000 years, would you still stress over, a missed deadline at work?
Probably not. I'd imagine that urgency just completely vanishes.
Exactly. Like, would you still feel that same knot in your stomach, that same, I don't know, urgency to apologize after a fight with a friend? Or would the endless, infinite stretch of time in front of you just slowly, quietly numb your connection to everyone around you?
That's a terrifying thought, honestly, when you really frame it like that.
It totally is. And welcome back to another deep dive. Today we are exploring this massive hypothetical because it actually reveals, well, a lot about our very real brains. We're looking at the factual psychology and philosophy behind eternal life.
Yes. And to do this, we're pulling from a really unique stack of sources today.
Yeah, we've got a comprehensive research dossier on the ethics of immortality, some super detailed character psychology guides, and excerpts from a sci-fi fantasy novel called San Vitae, The Awakening.
Which is such a phenomenal framework to use for this kind of psychological discussion. I mean, the world of San Vitae provides this incredibly vivid, post-cataclysmic backdrop where beings known as the San Vitae and their ancient rulers, the Santerrie Council, they live for centuries.
Right, which sounds like standard fantasy stuff on the surface.
It does, but what makes the author's approach so compelling is the use of that fantasy setting to explore very real, very grounded psychological concepts. We aren't just talking about magic spells here. We're digging into what actually happens to a human mind when you remove the biological boundary of death.
Okay, let's unpack this because it's such a fascinating angle. Usually in pop culture, immortality is portrayed as like the ultimate superpower.
Oh, totally. It's always highly romanticized.
Right, you get to read every book, learn every language, accumulate infinite wealth. But looking through this research dossier, immortality is framed more like a severe cognitive
A
distortion.
profoundly damaging one, yes.
But hold on, why wouldn't an infinite lifespan just make you incredibly wise and peaceful? I mean, if you have endless time, shouldn't you theoretically become, the most enlightened, patient being in the universe?
You would think so, but that assumes the human brain is capable of processing infinite time without losing its structural integrity.
What do you mean by structural integrity?
Well, humans are biologically and neurologically wired to think in decades.
Hmm.
Our entire motivational structure, our ability to plan, to care, to act, it's all based on a finite timeline.
So our brains just aren't built for forever.
Exactly. There's a psychological concept called proportional time theory. When you are 5 years old, 1 year is 20% of your entire existence.
Right, which is why summer vacation feels like an actual eternity when you're a kid.
Exactly. It feels endless. But when you are 50, a year is just 2% of your life. It flies by. Now, extrapolate that to a being that is, say, 1,000 years old,
Oh, wow. A year would literally feel like a long weekend.
or a Tuesday afternoon. And that severe compression of time leads to a phenomenon the research dossier calls consequence erosion.
Consequence erosion, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, think about it for a mortal. If you make a terrible mistake, or if you harm someone, the fallout of that action occupies a massive percentage of your remaining life. You feel the weight of it.
Because you have to live with it for the rest of your life, and your life is short.
Right, but when you have an endless lifespan, the natural fear of long-term outcomes just dissolves. The fallout of a ruined relationship, or in the case of the Santerrie Council, a destroyed city, is just a blip on your temporal radar.
You essentially just outlive the fallout. You outlive the people who are mad at you, the people you hurt, maybe even the memory of the event itself.
What's fascinating here is that this removes the psychological guardrails that basically dictate human morality.
Because morality is tied to consequences.
Yes, and that leads directly into the neurobiology of empathy. Empathy is not just a nice, warm feeling. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism.
Like, it keeps us from killing each other.
Exactly. It relies heavily on mirror neurons and a shared understanding of vulnerability. We understand each other's pain because we instinctively recognize that we are made of the same fragile material. We all age, we all get sick, we all eventually face death.
We're all in the same sinking boat, so we instinctively want to help each other patch the holes.
That is a great way to put it. The shared vulnerability is the glue of the social contract. But immortals, they step out of the boat.
Because they can't drown.
Right. They no longer share that biological fragility with mortals, and when you lose that common ground, the psychological bridge of empathy just begins to rot away. You can no longer truly relate to the frantic, fear-driven lives of beings whose entire existence is just a flash in the pan compared to yours.
It's just an involuntary detachment. You know, it sounds incredibly similar to playing a video game in God mode.
Oh, that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, like when I was a kid, you'd put in the cheat code, and it was incredibly fun at first. You're completely invincible, you can explore everywhere, defeat every enemy.
But then it gets boring.
Exactly. Inevitably, when you can't be hurt, the game completely loses its stakes. You stop playing by the rules, you stop caring about the actual objective of the game, and you just start breaking things out of sheer boredom because, well, nothing you do actually matters.
That is a perfect encapsulation of the psychological state we are talking about. Think about why you start breaking things in that game. It isn't because the cheat code made you inherently evil.
Right, it's just a lack of stakes. But wait, does an infinite lifespan guarantee someone turns evil? Or does it just remove their psychological guardrails?
According to the sources, it's the latter. Without stakes, you are starved for stimulation. The cruelty we see from the ancient Santerrie Council in the book isn't some mustache-twirling villainy.
They aren't just bad guys for the sake of being bad guys.
No, it is the predictable psychological decay of beings who are desperately seeking a stimulus in a world where nothing has permanent consequences for them. They're literally breaking things in the game.
So if the empathy is gone and the fear of consequences is gone, what actually drives them? I mean, if you have no endpoint, no ticking clock, it seems like you just run straight into a massive philosophical wall.
You do. You run into the crisis of existential boredom.
Existential boredom, that sounds exhausting.
It is. If we look at this through the lens of existentialist philosophy, and we're looking at the historical agnostic view here, completely separate from any specific theological doctrines, immortality across ancient epics is almost universally depicted as a curse.
Yeah, like a punishment from the gods.
Exactly. Think of Tithonus from Greek mythology.
Yeah.
He was granted eternal life, but not eternal youth, and he just ended up begging for death.
Wait, he's the one who just withered away into a cicada, right?
Right.
Just endlessly chirping, completely trapped in a tiny body forever.
Yes. A horrifying metaphor for endless existence without vitality. The core existentialist idea here is that meaning is not an inherent property of the universe. It is a human creation.
We haven't made it ourselves.
Right. And it is created specifically through choice, through struggle, and above all, through scarcity.
Scarcity. Because there's a limited supply of time.
Scarcity is the fundamental engine of value in human psychology. A diamond is valuable because it's rare. A human life is profoundly meaningful because it is finite. The absolute certainty of death forces us to prioritize, to love fiercely, to make our limited time actually count.
Because the urgency is what gives the action its weight. If you could do it tomorrow for the next million years, why do it today?
Exactly. Take away death and the urgency dissolves, just evaporates. For the immortals in our sources, boredom becomes existential, not situational.
What's the difference?
Well, situational boredom is waiting in line at the grocery store. It passes. Existential boredom is a chronic, agonizing state of total meaninglessness. Because they don't have a natural biological endpoint to force meaning onto their lives, well, meaning has to be artificially constructed.
But how does someone artificially construct meaning when they are fundamentally numb?
The source material provides a rather chilling answer to that. There is a deeply illustrative scene in Santerrie, the awakening involving the protagonist, Kurien, and his beloved Covenness Myasuchi.
Oh, I read this part. It is intense.
Very. She is subjected to a horrific, elaborate torture by the ancient Santerrie Council. And when Kurien is processing this, he comes to a terrifying realization about their motives. He realizes the council isn't using extreme, perverse violence out of passion. They aren't angry at her.
Which is wild.
They aren't seeking vengeance.
That almost makes it so much worse, you know? If they aren't angry, why go to such extreme lengths to inflict that much pain?
Because they are doing it simply to feel something. Anything at all. They're trying to pierce through the thick armor of their own emotional numbness.
Wow.
Kurien observes this and notes the profound tragedy of it. He sees their eternal youth, their immense power, and realizes they have absolutely no humanity left with which to actually enjoy it. He actually says, what a curse it must be to be ageless, youth eternal, but no humanity with which to enjoy it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The council's incredible decadence, their dark rituals, their atrocities, it's not power for the sake of power.
Yeah.
It is all a desperate, pathetic attempt to register a pulse on their own emotional radar.
Yes. They have to constantly escalate the horror just to get a baseline reaction from their own brains.
It's literally like a drug tolerance.
Very much so.
Like, the first century, maybe playing politics is enough to keep them entertained. But by century 5, they need absolute, horrific cruelty just to feel alive. But okay, if these beings are so incredibly dead inside, so completely detached from the value of life, why are they bothering to run the world? Why not just isolate themselves and sleep for 100 years?
Because maintaining control becomes the only remaining objective. And this is where the deep dive shifts from the individual psychological crisis to a massive societal one.
Oh, the macro level.
Right. When you put beings suffering from extreme empathy decay and existential boredom in charge of an entire society, you get a terrifying utilitarian distortion. The Santerrie justify their violent, totalitarian domination of the world as being strictly necessary for, quote-unquote, order.
But wait, isn't utilitarianism supposed to be a positive philosophical framework? Like the greatest good for the greatest number of people? That usually sounds pretty reasonable.
In theory, yes, it does. But utilitarianism requires a functional moral compass to weigh what good actually means. When an immortal, emotionally detached ruling class applies utilitarian math, it becomes grotesquely distorted.
Because they don't value the individual variable.
Precisely. Because they place zero value on individual finite human lives, horrific acts are easily, almost casually, justified as a minor price to pay for the greater good of long-term stability. The Mac becomes terrifyingly cold.
So crushing a city isn't a big deal to them.
If your perspective spans thousands of years, wiping out an entire generation of mortals to crush a rebellion isn't a tragedy. To them, it's just a minor pruning of the garden to keep the weeds from choking the pathways.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that maps so perfectly onto real human history. You look at long-standing dynasties, ancient empires, or authoritarian regimes that hold absolute power for generations.
The parallels are definitely there.
Yeah, the further removed the ruling class gets from the daily struggle of everyday survival, the more they devolve into absolute decadence. Cruelty stops being a reaction to a threat and simply becomes an administrative tool.
It's the normalization of extreme detachment. Concentrated power over long periods almost always leads to moral decay because the rulers become totally insulated. They stop seeing individuals and only see systems.
You just manage the machine.
Exactly. They become entirely focused on preserving the system of power rather than protecting the human beings trapped within it.
The research dossier actually brings up an amazing modern-day analogy for this. It calls it corporate immortality.
Oh,
It suggests that if you really want to understand the Santerrie Council, look at a massive multinational corporation. A corporation is essentially a legally immortal entity. It outlives its founders, it outlives its CEOs, it outlives its workforce.
and because its lifespan is potentially infinite, its fundamental nature leads it to make incredibly cold, calculated decisions.
Right. Because a corporate structure removes the natural psychological guardrails of individual human conscience. Like, an individual executive might feel terrible about polluting a river or laying off 10,000 people.
But the corporation itself feels absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all. It operates completely detached from human consequences, prioritizing its own endless survival, its profit margins, and its internal order above any sense of human empathy.
And the Santerrie Council functions exactly like that, an immortal corporation with absolute, unchecked political power.
It's just an endlessly hungry machine. So if entire immortal societies naturally collapse into this cold, utilitarian nightmare, what happens to the individual mind that has to actually endure it? I mean, how does a single person survive centuries of that kind of societal decay or personal suffering without just snapping and becoming exactly like the council?
Well, that is the core psychological struggle of the protagonist, Kurien. The sources dive deep into the intimate internal trauma of endless life. And they really don't shy away from the fact that surviving endless trauma when your lifespan is infinite presents an almost impossible challenge to the human mind.
Because we just aren't built for it.
The human brain is simply not built to carry centuries of accumulated grief, violence, and loss.
There is a specific part of the narrative that highlights this brilliantly, and honestly, it's completely horrifying. Kurien is captured and locked in an inquisitor's vault. He is subjected to absolute sensory deprivation, no light, no sound, no human contact.
The ultimate isolation.
And because of his biological immortality, his body physically cannot die from the starvation or the stress. He is trapped in the dark for what feels to his mind like 12 entire years.
The psychology of sensory deprivation is well documented, and it is devastating. The human brain is essentially a prediction machine that relies on constant external input.
It needs data to process.
Exactly. When you cut off that input, the brain doesn't just calmly power down. It begins to frantically manufacture its own reality. It synthesizes hallucinations to fill the void. Now, compound that with the inability to die.
Yeah.
A mortal would eventually succumb to physiological failure in that vault.
Their body would just give out.
Yes. But Kurien's body refuses to let him escape through death, so his mind has to find another way out.
He actually hallucinates an entire, incredibly detailed, decade-long false life with Myasuchi just to survive the reality of the vault. Like, he builds an entire world in his head.
It's a profound defense mechanism.
But the character psychology guide is very clear that he doesn't just emerge from this experience like a little shaken up. The trauma literally fractures his identity. It brings out this thing they call the demon aspect of the Vitae.
Yes, and it is vital to understand that the demon in this context is not a literal pitchfork-wielding monster from hell possessing his body.
Right, it's not a ghost story.
No, the author is using fantasy terminology to describe a very real, very documented psychological defense mechanism known as splitting, and specifically the emergence of the Jungian shadow.
The basement of your brain, essentially.
Exactly. Carl Jung, the foundational psychoanalyst, theorized that the shadow contains all the parts of ourselves that we repress in order to function in civilized society. Our primal instincts, our rage, our raw selfishness, our socially unacceptable urges.
We just lock them all in the basement of our subconscious.
But when a mind is pushed to the absolute brink-like 12 years of conscious sensory deprivation, civilized society is gone. The polite, moral, conscious self is simply too exhausted and too broken to endure the pain anymore.
So the basement door just bursts open.
And the shadow takes the wheel. In the lore of San Vitae, this defensive splitting allows the demon aspect to take over. Psychologically, this aspect represents Kurien's survival-driven immorality.
It just wants to live.
It is the raw, unpolished, feral will to live, completely stripped of ethical constraints. It doesn't care about right or wrong, collateral damage, or nobility. It only cares about living through the next agonizing second.
It's the part of him willing to do absolutely anything to survive when his human morality just wants to give up and die. So what does this all mean? If immortality requires you to rely on a psychological demon just to endure the passage of time and the accumulation of trauma, is eternal life just an endless cycle of moral fatigue and PTSD?
It speaks to a profound existential philosophy of suffering. For a mortal, suffering is usually a phase. It's an event that happens and eventually it ends, either through resolution or through the natural end of life.
There's an endpoint.
But if you live forever, suffering is an absolute certainty compounded over centuries. The moral fatigue you mentioned is the sheer grinding exhaustion of trying to remain a good, empathetic, connected person when you outlive everyone you love and you endure endless cycles of societal collapse and personal violence.
You don't just get to live forever as the exact same person you are right now. The accumulation of years literally forces you to mutate.
Exactly. Without the release of death, suffering becomes the primary sculptor of your identity. You face a terrible binary. You either become completely numb and detached, like the Santerrie Council, or your mind fractures under the weight of it, like Kurien.
That's a grim choice.
But the arc of his character is deeply therapeutic in a theoretical sense, because it isn't about him destroying this demon.
Right, he can't just shove it back into the basement.
Oh, because it is a part of him. It kept him alive. The psychological goal is integration. He has to acknowledge that this terrifying, violent, survivalist part of himself exists. He has to process the trauma and integrate that shadow into his conscious identity to become whole again, rather than letting it control him from the subconscious.
Wow. Okay, so to synthesize everything we've pulled from these sources today, immortality, when you strip away the romantic pop culture myths, is framed as a profound psychological hazard. Endless time removes the scarcity that gives our actions inherent meaning. It actively erodes our empathy by removing our shared vulnerability to death. It twists leadership into cold, utilitarian cruelty. And on an individual level, it requires the human mind to fracture and split just to endure the agonizing weight of centuries of memory and trauma.
That is an excellent summary of the factual psychology layered within the fiction. It forces us to confront the fact that the human mind evolved specifically to function within the parameters of mortality. Remove those parameters and the system crashes.
It completely flips the script on how we view our own lives. It makes you realize that for you, listening right now, the beauty of mortality isn't something to dread or run from.
It's what gives life its texture.
Right. The fact that your time is limited, the fact that the clock is ticking down is the exact mechanism that makes your relationships, your choices, and your empathy so profoundly valuable. The stakes are real precisely because the game has an end. Every decision matters because you only have a finite number of them to make.
Which leaves us with a truly vital philosophical question to ponder, one that the research dossier explicitly poses for us to consider as we look toward the future of human technology. This raises an important question. If medical science were to crack the code of biological aging tomorrow, if you were handed that gift of endless time and infinite tomorrows, would that endless life actually make you kinder? Or would it inevitably make you colder? Ask yourself what happens to you and what happens to our society when we eventually outlive our own morality.
Think about that video game in God mode. How long before you get bored, stop playing by the rules, and just start breaking things to feel a spark? It is a fascinating, genuinely chilling thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you. Keep looking for the deeper meaning in the fiction you consume. And keep exploring the incredible complexities of the human mind.